Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show. This is the second last one before the big 2021 election, which may end up with things looking a lot like they were in 2020. We'll see. Justin called it. It looks like it might be backfiring on him. He's not getting ahead anywhere. He's actually been sliding. The Conservatives have been making gains, but they seem to have gained up to where they were in 2019 and stalled there. One thing that's a story, though, that's interesting is this time Maxime Bernier's PPC, they're really taking off. I mean, the media's not reporting on it a lot, but the pollsters, they've got no choice. They've got to point out, even the CBC site, they have a poll aggregator at the state broadcaster over there, and it shows a number of them. And the PPC is getting into the 8, 9, close to 10% mark across the country in some of those polls. I mean, that's from 2% before. Meanwhile, the Green Party has totally collapsed. The PPC is not getting any coverage. They're just doing it through alternative media, working on the ground. If the mainstream media does pay attention to them, it's usually to basically take shots at them. So this is a factor that's coming into this election that could really turn into an impacting force, a spoiler. I mean, people are saying even, well, it doesn't matter, they're not going to win any seats. Well, we don't know that. Maxime Bernier apparently is right neck and neck in his home riding right now, and there could be a few others across the country. In the 2019 election, 47 ridings were won by 5% or less. So think about that. If you've got another party that's on the scene that wasn't there before and they're drawing 8 to 10%, you can't pretend that this party isn't going to have an impact on that race, whether it's making the candidates have to pivot and adjust and change their policies to try and take back what they've been losing to the PPC, or possibly losing what would have been a winning race because they refused to figure out what was stemming that bleeding, and they let the PPC get away with it. So that's a different dynamic in this election, and it's really something to watch closely. People are getting fed up. I mean, it's a small group, but they are a dedicated group. And, something I've been looking for, I've been wanting to see rational opposition to government restrictions, to government pushback, to government forcing of vaccination, to lockdowns. I want to see people do it at the ballot box. I want to see rallies, but rallies where people can look at it and say, yeah, I can relate with these people. This is making an impact. This is changing my views. This is making me want to come out and join them. And I've had difficulty seeing that. Well, something different happened a couple of days ago, and unsurprisingly, the mainstream media barely touched it. But a large number of Calgarian firefighters, police officers, first responders came out, and they did a quiet, reserved protest at City Hall against the mandatory vaccines and some of these restrictions. These guys do not want to be forced to medicate, and they're going to lose their jobs if they refuse. So we're going to lose that many. When we're in a labor crisis, we're in a healthcare crisis, when we're in this problem, these guys are going to be out of the workforce. They're gone. So we're going to be that much more restricted in being able to respond to emergencies and problems. This is not an improvement on the public service for people who want the bigger welfare state. And these guys, I just want to say, I've been going out looking for good protests that make an impact. That one did. Look it up online. We'll get that footage of it. Keep an eye on the Western Standard. We're going to cover that because it kind of slid under the radar. It caught us off guard. I would have loved to have gone out and covered that myself because I kept going out to cover other ones, and I was kind of disappointed by what I found. These guys really made an impression. They made a mark, and it sounds like they're going to continue to do so. So we're seeing people stepping up at the ballot box. Again, we're seeing things like the PPC is gaining a bunch of support because they're standing up for those rights. And we're seeing groups now of professionals and other people getting out there, standing up for themselves, saying, look, we've got to push back against this ever-encroaching government reach upon our rights. So before I get on to who our guests are going to be, and I've got a couple of good guests coming on today, I should speaking of our rights, to our sponsor, and that's the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. These guys are out there standing up for your right to own, enjoy firearms, use them, transfer the property. Your right. It is a right. And we don't have entrenched firearm rights like the United States, but we do have property rights if we'll stand up for them. And we have a great deal of other rights. And they're under threat. The Liberals want to take away your property, they want to take away your firearms, they want to take away your ability to go out and enjoy them responsibly. So the Canadian Centre for Firearm Rights is standing up for that. They're actually taking the government to courts on this, and they're going to help work to ensure that you can keep those rights intact. And it's at firearmrights.ca. Go there, check them out and click on why join, and they will lay out all the reasons why you should be supporting them and helping them out. Now, getting on to rights, I've got two guests today. I'm going to have Jay Cameron. He's from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. We haven't checked in on them for a while, and they've been a very, very busy group. They provide legal aid and help to people who have gotten in trouble for infringing on pandemic restrictions, people who've opened restaurants, those sorts of criminals, and people who have attended protests, people who have held church services, all those evil and nasty things. Well, they've been fighting it out in the courts with mixed success, but it'll be good to check in and see what they're up to, what they've done so far, and what we can look forward to out of them. As well, on that interesting race in Banff-Airdrie, the federal one, I did speak with Tarek El-Nega last week. He's running for the Maverick Party out there. Now I've got Nadine Wellwood. She's going to come in and check in. She's running for the PPC out there. Derek Sloan is running out there. It's turned into sort of an alternative right battleground just outside of Calgary, and it's a hotly contested race. So I'm going to talk to Nadine for a little while on that and see how that race has been going for her. So back on our show today, we have Jay Cameron from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. They've been busy as all get out. The government's still infringing on our rights. It's not so much the lockdowns now it's more towards forcing and coercing vaccinations upon people. And the Justice Center is trying to stand up for those rights. So thanks again for coming on, Jay.
Thanks for having me on, Cory.
So you've got some data and things you wanted to start with and cover. Can you expand a bit on that?
Yeah, so the background is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And anytime there's an infringement of civil liberties, the question starts with the Charter when it's the government doing the infringing. And so there are two specific grounds of the Charter that we say are being infringed, and we think that that's basically a no-brainer. The first is Section 7 of the Charter, which guarantees security of the person. And it has been the law in Canada for ages that you have a right to make your own decisions regarding your medical treatment. And now, under the threat of coercion and the removal of other civil liberties and participation in society, you're being told you get this shot or else. And that's a host of provinces doing that. And so, but then you have to move over to Section 1. And before you get to Section 1, the other ground of the Charter is freedom of conscience and religion. And there are a number of segments of society, religious groups, who have complaints about the coercive steps to compel them to get this shot. And I could talk about that a little later, but the analysis then moves over to Section 1. And the question is whether or not that infringement is justified. And in order to look at whether or not the infringement is justified, you have to look at the facts. You have to look at the rationale. You have to look at the degree of impairment, those types of issues. And so the backdrop of these shots is going to be key in that legal analysis. And so I want to run through a few things for your viewers, because these are the kinds of things that nobody's talking about much in the mainstream media. There's only one narrative, and questions like what I'm going to ask are suppressed. These are all facts that I want to talk about here. For example, in BC, there's a mandatory shot now. You have to get it, otherwise you're banned from participating in a lot of elements in society. And there's a quote from Adrienne Dix, who's the health minister. She says, "Getting vaccinated keeps everyone in BC safe and stops the spread of COVID-19, or prevents the spread of COVID-19," which is a very, very broad claim. And that quote is echoed basically verbatim or almost verbatim on the Service BC website. And there are no exemptions to this requirement in BC. So it's take the shot or be segregated from society. Now, the question that some people are asking is it true? Does taking the COVID shot prevent the spread of COVID? That's the government's assertion to the public. That's their statement. Is it true? And so the data is coming out from US universities who started school a little bit before Canadian universities. A lot of these universities have requirements for students to be vaccinated as a condition of being on campus. And so Duke University, for example, is the most vaccinated university in North Carolina. And their population is 98% vaccinated. And yet this past Monday, they had an outbreak of COVID of 349 people. All but 8 of those people were fully vaccinated. So this is a COVID infection that is spreading on the campus in the fully vaccinated population. A similar incident occurred in Cape Cod in Massachusetts, where the majority of people infected at a big breakout were double vaccinated. Not only were they double vaccinated, but they carried the same viral load as the unvaccinated. So the vaccinated people had the same viral load or just as much of the virus as the unvaccinated. And that outbreak occurred, had about 900 cases, and the majority of them, I think 75%, were in people who were fully vaccinated. The University of Georgia, the Georgia Bulldogs, their football team is at least 90% vaccinated. They've had a similar event just this week where their double vaccinated players are contracting the virus and they're getting sick. And so the claim from the BC government that the shot stops or prevents, that's the language, that's their language, that's not my language, that it prevents the spread of COVID-19, we need to stop pretending that that's the case, because it doesn't. We know that the virus can spread in the vaccinated population. Not only can it spread, but it is spreading. For example, the country of Gibraltar, I believe, is the most vaccinated country on the face of the planet and has a 100% vaccination rate, and they're in the midst of a big COVID-19 outbreak. So they don't have anybody to blame it on over there, right? There's no unvaccinated people to blame it on. So what about all those people? Here's another part of the narrative that I think is going to play into a court case. What about all the people who already had COVID, right? There's millions of people who had COVID. We know that. And we're being told that the shot antibodies, the antibodies produced by the shots are superior to natural immunity, because of course the point of getting a vaccine is to develop antibodies. But if you've already had COVID and you have those antibodies, some people are saying we shouldn't have to get the shot. And in fact, some medical research says that you could be at risk if you get the shot. So the question is which antibodies, which immunity is superior? And there's this study, it's a peer-reviewed study that was reported in Science magazine. And it said, it's from an Israeli study, and it said that the natural immunity protection that develops after a SARS-CoV-2 infection offers considerably more of a shield against the Delta variant of the pandemic coronavirus than 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. So they're saying in the study that your natural immunity, which develops from having COVID, is superior to being double vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine. Isn't that interesting? That's not something that the BC government is telling its people, is it? There's also an interesting study or a report from the CDC regarding the ability of vaccinated people to transmit. And I'm going to send these links to you. Health Canada in Canada has warning labels for Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson for myocarditis, pericarditis, Bell's palsy, and thrombosis. So the question is, when your employer tells you you have to get this shot, is your employer going to indemnify you in the event that you develop one of these conditions, which are on the warning labels from Health Canada? And the answer is, at least from Justin Trudeau, is that no, you shouldn't be able to sue your employer. You shouldn't be able to sue a place of business that excludes you and refuses you service. And that's because, quite frankly, some people have a problem with the rule of law. And so that's an interference, at least on the employment side, with contractual relations, because you have a contractual agreement with your employer. And it doesn't include, I can tell you right now, it does not include, in 99% of the contracts in Canada, it does not include a clause whereby, as a condition of your employment, you have to get an experimental shot that is the subject of all these warnings from Health Canada. There's no such clause in the contract. And so to tell an employee they can't litigate against their employer would be to profoundly interfere in that contractual relationship. And that's what Justin Trudeau is proposing to do. Some other considerations that Canadians have a right to consider regarding whether or not they get these shots. And these are arguments that are going to be presented in court, because the Justice Centre is going to be filing a lawsuit against the BC vaccine passports and is working on a lawsuit in Ontario as well. So one of the considerations is the fact that there is no liability for these pharmaceutical companies. And so if you're profoundly injured, you cannot seek recourse against these companies. And the New York Times back in January 2021 reported on the fact that secret agreements have been made by big pharma and government whereby pharma gets all of these promises from government, including a lack of liability, right? Immunity from civil suits. We know that they were rushed into production. We know that reluctant Canadians, despite the fact that they've been bombarded with the narrative, that some people still have questions, and they remember drugs like thalidomide and Zantac and Fen-Phen, which was a weight loss drug, and the lawsuits against these products, which, by the way, were approved by the best doctors, and they were approved by the government and stamped as being safe. Well, whoops, it turns out that they aren't safe, and they were proven to be deadly, actually. And so, Canadians have a right to ask questions about the track record of these companies. Presumably, since they've been given a waiver of liability, right? They can never be the subject of a civil suit if somebody dies or somebody develops one of these conditions. Wow, they must have an impeccable track record. They must be perfect, right? Is that the case? No, I'm afraid not, Cory. Both Pfizer and AstraZeneca have massive lawsuits against them in the past for product flaws. Pfizer has the distinction of having to make the biggest criminal payout in history at $2.3 billion for the fraudulent promotion of pharmaceuticals. AstraZeneca, their shot was banned in 18 countries, then that's the COVID shot, for concerns about blood clots, later reversed in some countries. I don't know about all of them. Both AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson have had so-called mix-ups in their ingredients with respect to the COVID shots. And there was recently a 1.5 million dose withdrawal from Moderna doses in Japan because the doses contained something that appeared to be metal. So, do you as a Canadian have a right to ask questions under Section 7? And they do. You do. And, another question that you're going to ask as a Canadian is, do these companies have a lot of practice in bringing vaccines to market? And the answer is, for some of them, is no. Neither Moderna nor Johnson & Johnson have ever brought a vaccine to market before the COVID vaccine. Another concern is the fact that what we're witnessing in Canada and in other places around the world, and I'm grateful for the fact that you're having me on to even have this discussion, is because a lot of these conversations are being censored. You have doctors who are raising questions about the efficacy and the safety of some of these shots, especially for young children. And they're being censored, and they're being hit with College of Physician complaints because they exercise their conscientious right and their duty to their patients to ask questions about safety. So there's a lack of ability to ask questions. There's a lack of ability to have dialogue. Another concern is that there's no sunset clauses. When is enough doses? Is it 5? Is it 6? Is it 10? Remember 2 weeks to flatten the curve? So the question is, ultimately speaking, in this pending lawsuit, is who owns your body? Does Justin Trudeau own your body? Does Bonnie Henry own your body? Does Dina Hinshaw own your body? Or do you own your body? Do you get to make decisions? And on what basis do you get to make decisions? And should you be free of government coercion? Like I said, you have a right under Section 7 of the Charter to make decisions regarding your own medical treatment free of state coercion and duress. And the last thing I think it's important to remember is that you have to remember who's pushing these shots. This is the same government, at least federally, that forced Canadians into federal facilities against their will and under the threat of arrest. This is the same government that has been trying for years to control and punish the lawful speech of Canadians that it disagree with, and it has brought in Bill C-10 and Bill C-36, which gives massive control to bureaucrats over speech that's on the internet, people's expression. It's the same government that has been discriminating against religious people with views that do not conform to government's new woke ideology. It's the same government that has corrupted the independence of the media and sent millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, to the legacy media outlets. And so, the Canadians, I think, can be forgiven for asking questions about the safety of these shots, and they do have rights under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. the starting point for these conversations needs to be, how can we work around Canadian Section 7 rights and their religious rights? It needs to be, Canadians have these rights, and how have we addressed their concerns? And the fact is that for millions of Canadians, and that's something that's being left out of this conversation as well, for millions of Canadians, that's something that's not being talked about in the media. The fact that there are millions of people, instead they're being vilified by politicians and being called those people, and being being told that they're a risk to the population, when we know that the virus is spreading amongst the vaccinated just like the unvaccinated. And there's some data that is coming out to show that maybe it's spreading more amongst the vaccinated population than the unvaccinated population. And so there are a lot of questions. And so before people start jumping to conclusions that vaccine passports and the loss of your employment is a fait accompli, I think we need to step back and take a look at the fact that people have these rights under the Constitution, and there's going to be a lot of lawsuits about this.
Well, and the legislations, the restrictions, the passports, these things are really moving quickly. I mean, they're bypassing everything. Unfortunately, our courts tend not to move terribly quickly. So what kind of timeline is your legal action on right now?
Well, we're being inundated with hundreds and thousands of complaints from a lot of different people and in a lot of different provinces. And so the drafting of the lawsuit in Ontario is underway. We have gathered experts, and those are being prepped. And so those materials are being prepared, and hopefully that lawsuit will be filed sooner rather than later. But I think that, given the aggressive stance of some of these governments, especially BC, where they're saying there is no exemption whatsoever, it doesn't matter if you have a disability or a medical exemption, there are no exemptions for this shot. So I think that probably it's likely that you're going to see an injunction application, especially if you start to see people losing their jobs because they're reluctant to get these shots. And so I also expect that that's going to be sooner rather than later, but I don't have a clear timeline for you, but we're looking at weeks, not months.
Okay, because I mean, as you said, that push is almost getting to the point of fanatical. I mean, the BC government, as you said, they're using language that even with a slight checking, you can realize, no, this doesn't stop the spread. Nobody actually in medical authority has claimed that it stops the spread even. I mean, some have claimed it reduces it. Yeah, we've got a government not afraid to make these claims as they basically make it a mandatory medication. That's very distressing.
It is, and there's a disproportionate effect on disadvantaged Canadians. Jamil Javani out in Toronto has pointed out the fact that there are some ethnic groups, there are some religious groups who have larger objections, and so there's going to be a disproportionate impact on some demographics. And the other concerning thing is that you have this language about vilifying these people who are unvaccinated and who have made a decision, which they have a legal right to do, to take a wait and see approach with these shots. And they're being vilified as disease spreaders and a public risk. And there's a historical echo from other leaders in the past who have marginalized and singled out a group of people and implied that they were dirty and spreaders of disease and stoked public fear and hatred against them. And ultimately, those people end up being persecuted both by the public and by the government. And so that's a very, very dangerous and concerning precedent to set. And it's, quite frankly, it's reprehensible and it's completely immoral and irresponsible. But for the government to be doing that.
When the state creates a group of pariahs and starts to separate and isolate them and play the politics of division, it never ends well. And we've seen this historically a number of times. Where can we find more information? Then where can we look up what you guys are doing and see how they can help out the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, or perhaps inquire on personal issues with you guys?
Yeah, so the website is www.jccf.ca. The Justice Center takes no government funding. It is entirely donor sponsored, and we're bringing litigation in at least 2 provinces over these mandates.
Okay, well, we'll be watching very closely, and thank you very much for coming on to let us know what you guys are doing with regards to this, because it's a very distressing trend going on, and nobody is standing up for the rights of individuals to make that medical choice for themselves. So I really appreciate that.
My pleasure. Thanks, Cory.
All right, thanks. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon, Jay. All right, thanks for joining me today, Nadine. Welcome back to the show and bringing us an update from the Banff-Airdrie race out there. How's it going so far?
It's been going really good. The reception has been tremendous. And of course, things are heating up. Lots of attention now on this riding in particular. So the Cochrane Parade, we had such an amazing reception. It was incredible. And people were so excited to hear the message. So things are going really well.
Well, good. And the PPC is really making some waves. We're seeing the registering on the polls. They're really starting to grab some broad support across the country. And this is despite the mainstream media pretty much ignoring you guys. So I can imagine your ground game's contributing a lot to that growing support.
Absolutely. And, they can do their best to ignore it. But the problem is it truly is grassroots and it's moving from the bottom up. So, media that are choosing, I think, to ignore or disregard us at this point, they're doing so at their own peril, honestly.
Yeah, well, and it's not just conservatives that the PPC is grabbing. I think that's, a misnomer that some people have. Like, I'm seeing people coming out now, they were former Greens supporters or even some Liberals because they're still concerned about personal restrictions, lockdowns, vaccine mandates. These are things that aren't necessarily drawn on party lines, and the PPC is the only one sort of offering a blanket opposition to all of those measures.
That is exactly it, Cory. We, right now, this has nothing to do with NDP, Liberal, or Conservative Party of Canada. This truly election, Justin Trudeau has made this all about rights and freedoms. And, some of the strongest supporters for rights and freedoms are your NDP and your Green. And so they are abandoning their own party because they just, they respect an individual's right to choose. And what better platform than the PPC? We're the only national party that has come out and stood alongside of, what I believe the majority of Canadians and said, we will stand with you and protect our Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Yeah, well, we're seeing an interesting new dynamic entering the scene. I mean, we see Jagmeet Singh or Rachel Notley, NDP leaders, very strongly in favor of mandatory vaccines and basically firing people if they won't take a medication. And it's putting the unions in a terribly hard spot because, okay, you're going to stand up for your rights of your employees or your NDP bosses. But those workers, the ones who truly don't want to be vaccinated, the ones who personally just do not want to accept that, they are now completely politically homeless, and the PPC is providing them an outlet now.
Well, it's not only that. I mean, we have police officers, we have Calgary firefighters who went arm to arm yesterday because they disagree with this. I mean, these are our front line people. We have nurses and doctors who are going to walk off the job, who have served us unselfishly and give everything they had last year to find themselves unemployed this year because they refused to get a vaccine. Well, they didn't get one last year. They were able to comply and do their job just fine. I don't understand this real push to get vaccinated. And when you look at the data and you look at the stats now coming out of Israel, coming out of the UK, if you're vaccinated, you can transmit the disease just as easily as you can if you're unvaccinated. So this whole, I will not have somebody sit next to my child on a plane, a train, Justin Trudeau was just creating division. And unfortunately, Mr. O'Toole, I challenge anybody, you find me one major policy where Aaron O'Toole is not the same as Justin Trudeau. So we've got liberal, and then you got NDP, which is so far left, I think, that they've lost even their own way. So, we've got the choice of you can vote Liberal or NDP because Aaron O'Toole and Justin Trudeau are exactly the same on every issue. And then there's us. So we really are the only alternative.
Yeah, and again, just, kind of sticking to that vaccine thing because it seems to be kind of the biggest divisive points. I mean, myself, I don't personally have a big issue with vaccines, but I got a huge issue with intrusive government. I mean, I want to make sure it's always somebody's choice. I would like more people to choose vaccination, but if they don't, it's not the government's place to force that. And there's just nobody aside from you guys really pushing back on that right now.
And that's the very rational, common sense approach we've taken, is we respect the rights of all Canadians. If you choose to get vaccinated, that is your medical choice, and it is a private decision between you and your doctor, you and your family. It is nobody else's business. And to say that I now have to show a passport, papers, please, to go into a restaurant to have something to eat, or, look at what's happening in France. I mean, people are being barred out of grocery stores. How long before that comes a policy here? It has to stop, and it'll only stop when people finally say, enough's enough. And we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We have a Canadian Bill of Rights. We have a Constitution. Those documents were put into place specifically for times like this, times of crisis. We do not need laws when everything is going well. We need laws to protect us against the overreach of power-hungry governments.
And getting beyond that, so we've seen O'Toole did a complete flip-flop on his promise to repeal Trudeau's firearm legislation that was going to ban everything from airsoft rifles to presumably squirt guns if they look too assault-like to somebody. The PPC is standing up as well. I mean, I believe when I spoke to Maxime Bernier, he was very clear that law is going to be repealed.
Absolutely. I mean, why are we targeting legal firearms owners? They are some of the most vetted people in the country. And in reality, they're not the ones committing the crimes. So if you look at under Justin Trudeau, and for example, in Toronto, crime has skyrocketed. Those aren't done with legal gun owners. Those are done by crime criminals, gang members. And they're not buying their guns legally. They're bringing them in through illegal channels. So why are we focusing all this time and effort and energy to disarm, because that's what it is. They're just looking to disarm the population as opposed to dealing with the real problem, the crime, the gangs, the criminals.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous waste of resources, and very few, unfortunately, seem, again, if focus groups in downtown Toronto say they want it, it seems that's what the major parties are going to give us. Getting onto the regional front now, Maxime Bernier was also very clear that he would respect provincial rights, provincial autonomy, very strong things. He wants the federal government to get out of all the areas that are not provincial jurisdiction, and the government's in a whole lot of them. But that's some ground you're sharing. You guys are in a different battleground in the West with the PPC. That you've got the Maverick Party also talking about provincial autonomy and things such as that out there. So what's differentiating the PPC from the Maverick on that front out where you are?
So here's the biggest thing with the Maverick Party. The Maverick Party, again, is dividing the country by geography. They, by their own admission, we are a Western party. Well, the issue of freedom and rights is not an issue of West versus East. It's an issue of ideology, philosophy. It's an issue of values. So where they're dividing the country, saying East versus West, really what the PPC is saying, we are uniting the country. Everybody across this country who is, and based upon values and principles. So we're looking to unite every conservative voice, every person who agrees with freedoms and rights, every person. It doesn't matter whether you're NDP, Liberal, it doesn't matter whether you're East, West. And let's take a look at it. If we're going to be honest here in the West, what does Alberta really have in common with anything in Lower Mainland BC? Nothing. They did a thing and they said they wouldn't, they're only going to pander to the West. Well, even within the West, we have major ideological differences. So the big difference for me between the Maverick Party and the PPC is they're a Western, very regional, which that should be a provincial party, not a federal one. And they're dividing the country East versus West. We're looking to unite the country based upon values and principles.
So a big turning point is unfortunate, but the PPC has been shut out of the debates. The mainstream media has sort of rallied the troops and they've kept you out. They're going to have the Green Party that's basically fallen into disarray, but they'll be representing a quiet little corner over there on the debate floor over a couple of nights. Is Maxime going to be trying to do something to reach out during that period or afterwards to at least give the PPC point of view to people who want to hear it, who won't be able to hear it during the debates?
Yeah, actually, he is going to be following along with the debates and then just sort of retweeting out his comments as they go along. So, you'll be able to hear Maxime's response and just check back in so that I don't get the link wrong or anything like that. But if you follow Maxime on Twitter, and he'll be tweeting out his comments as the debates continue along.
Yeah, well, and it's been interesting. We're in some interesting new times that parties, movements can manage to get public traction despite the mainstream media. And that's what we're seeing happening with the PPC right now. So the media can ignore the PPC, but it doesn't matter. The voters are finding them and they're getting out there. So this is kind of, I think, going to backfire on them as their debate's losing legitimacy.
I think so too, because what they're doing is they're proving themselves, to be very biased. And the news, and there's already a distrust, I think, of the mainstream news media, because people do know they're biased. I mean, when Justin Trudeau pays $1.2 billion to CBC, well, you're a little beholden to serve your master. So, for a lot of people, that they are seeking out other avenues. And this is, again, part of the PPC platform. We need to protect independent journalism, and we need to protect the individual's right to speak. And that is being, been under attack for quite some time under this Liberal Trudeau government. And if he has his way, it'll get harder and harder with each passing month, day, year. For even people to communicate on by means of social media. I mean, look at the censorship, the blocking, fact checkers that is going on. All that really does need to go away.
Yeah, no, we've seen a strong interest, particularly on the part of the Liberal Heritage Minister, to try and control discourse and exchange of information as much as humanly possible. And authoritarians always want to do that, whether it's left or right, it doesn't really matter. But again, we're finding the ways to get around that and bypass. So I won't take you from your busy campaign too much longer, because it's the ground game that's so important. So have you got more events coming up in the next couple of weeks, and where can we find more information about your campaign?
Sure. Well, I'm actually going to be in Airdrie this evening at the public library. There is going to be an all candidates meet and greet there. And that is at 6:30, I believe, again, Airdrie Public Library. And on Monday, we will be in Canmore. There is an all candidates debate. And Tuesday here in Cochrane, all candidates debate. And on Thursday in Airdrie, an all candidates debate. So I'm not hard to find. I will be at each of those events, and I'm always happy to answer people's questions. Please do come talk to me. We have I think the most solid common sense policies, and I think that are best for Canada, what's best for Alberta. We have a platform that is fair for everybody. So, people talk about affordability today. Well, government is the biggest expense. And yet you've got every other party looking to increase the size of government, increase spending. I mean, even Aaron O'Toole, $100 billion he's going to spend in the next 10 years. And then he claims he can balance that budget without making any cuts. That's a ridiculous statement. Absolutely ridiculous. I'm a chartered investment manager. I mean, when you look at a balance sheet, there's expenses and there's revenue. And if you're not cutting expenses, then you're increasing revenues. And considering that it's the Canadian public, we're the revenue, we should all be very concerned about that. So there is a lot of issues that are being overshadowed, I think, this time around in this election, because freedoms and rights are so critical. Without that, there's no point in discussing anything else. I mean, that's the reality. So we have to have that fight. We've got to dig our heels in, and we've got to have that discussion. But, affordability, inflation, fiscal responsibility, gun rights, all of these things, critical issues that need to be discussed, that are just completely being overshadowed, unfortunately, at this time. And of course, I've made freedoms and rights my number one campaign issue, followed closely with fiscal responsibility. But, if you're not hearing something and you have a question, please do ask, because we have a great platform that addresses, the issues that matter to all Canadians.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining me today to give that update. We got a really exciting and different campaign going on across the entire country, so I'm looking forward to see how it all irons out in a couple of weeks.
Fantastic. NadineWellwood.ca is my website. Info at Nadine Wellwood. You can reach me anytime.
Great. Thanks again for coming on, Nadine. I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Thank you, Cory. It's always a pleasure.
Well, there you go. Looking forward to joining you all next week as we get into the final stretch of this election year, this election campaign and race. By the way, we can't do this. We can't get these interviews. We can't do this coverage without the great support of the members and subscribers for the Western Standard. We don't take tax dollars from the government in order to operate. We rely on you guys. And the subscribers have been great. We've got a growing number all the time. Get on, check it out. If you haven't subscribed already, go to Western Standard Online. There's some fantastic content, columns, news items, videos, you name it. We got some great people putting stuff out there. For $10 a month, you can get full access to it. There's a free trial to check it out. Just try it out for a little while. You'll find this is well worth it. Costs less than it used to subscribe to a newspaper back in the past. Things cost money. As you subscribe, we get more sponsors, we can produce more content. We don't need to rely on the mainstream media anymore, and we sure don't need to rely on the government to tell us what to watch, what to view, and what's going to be reported. So thank you to the members who have already signed up, and to you who haven't already, please go to Western Standard Online, take out a membership as well if you haven't subscribed on the YouTube channel, Facebook. These things are all important to us. Subscribe, hit like, do those things, share it, spread it around, and we can bypass the old establishment media.